The National Video Games Museum in Frisco, Texas showcases the history of video games like an all-encompassing narrative. From the Odyssey to the Xbox One and much in between, this is, more than anything, a look into video game industry history in the US. But we all know there's more to the history of video games than that. The museum obviously can't include everything, but I believe it's missing something very important. And to put in what's missing, we need to know how the museum functions. The museum is organized in stages, which is less like a timeline and more like a recommended order to walk through the museum in. One of these stages in particular is called the Sanctuary, Stage 14. This stage is meant to be immersive. It is a recreation of what a typical living room looked like in the 1980s, complete with wood paneling, shag carpet, and even old magazines. The other room is a bedroom, very clearly a boy's bedroom. Another recreation of the era, it features Duck Hunt as the game of choice. The room includes band posters, cabinets of cassette tapes with players to match, and lots of Pac-Man merchandise. The way the Sanctuary stands right now is good, but could still use another addition. While it was true that not many girls in the 1980s played video games, I do think that adding a 90s girls room would add to the experience. That claim may be true for the entirety of the museum as well, and I made this claim right at the beginning when I walked in. These displays appeal to personal connection more than the coding or anything like that. Everything in here is about the novelty, pretty much. So the intent of the exhibit was personal connection, but there is a significant group left out from that exhibit as well. Why does there need to be a girls' room, and especially one that doesn't fit in with the era that the Sanctuary presents? Wouldn't it just look out of place compared to the rest of the museum? I would say no, it wouldn't. There are items in the museum that are clearly made for girls, and they have existed for a long time. A girls' room would not look out of place. The reason a whole room is necessary is that girls' video games, consoles, and merchandise made about those games are few and far between. Here are the few items that I found. One of these is not like the others. Yes, it's the only girly-looking controller. You can tell because it has pink and purple on it and says Barbie on the top. Okay, saw the second instance of girl games in these displays. What I'm seeing here is a staggering lack of any girls' games. Just consoles that look a bit girly, like this pink glittery Game Boy Pocket. Only one I'm seeing here is Barbie Ocean Discovery for the Nintendo Game Boy. Okay, looking further into it, this particular Game Boy Pocket was never sold in stores. It was a prototype. And these other two girly looking models here, they were only sold in Japan. Okay, we're now at the checkpoint where there's a bunch of items that don't belong in the other stages, such as obscure games, paraphernalia, different versions of different consoles, all of that kind of thing. This is where most of the girls' stuff kind of is, but I think that there is enough girl stuff here to get its own section at this museum, because that kind of thing is just too important to ignore, and it does erase the identities of some of the gamers, especially the ones who are coming in now. They need to be represented to see themselves in these displays. The reason we don't see a lot of girly stuff in this museum is not at fault of the curators, but at fault of the video games industry entirely. Ludica, or Fron et al., call this the hegemony of play, where only specific demographics create video games, and make them only for those who match those demographics.
What if you don't have blast processing?
This means only men and boys who are, quote, predominantly white, secondarily Asian, end quote. Those players grow up only to perpetuate the cycle, making even more games for that one exclusive audience. But in the 90s, there was a push to make video games for the players who were left out.
Now you're playing with power, superpower.
Girls and women were consistently excluded from the target audience of video games. In the third wave of feminism, there was a small but vocal push towards video games for girls. Purple Moon was created to publish games no one's ever seen before. Emotionally involved point-and-click games that were made for preteen girls called friendship adventures. Mattel created games that appealed to younger girls with designs that were bright pink and focused on dress-up. Purple Moon was short-lived, but still has a small fan base today, while Mattel's bright pink Barbie games persisted. This, I think, is as important of a topic as any that can be included in an exhibit. Now we can see why there needs to be a girls' room in the sanctuary, but how would we build it? So we're gonna start off with a pink room that kind of has the same layout as the boys' room. Let's put in that cabinet that's also painted pink to fit the theme. And let's put in some 90s boy band posters, just so you know that this is a girls' room we're talking about. Put a little radio on that cabinet, because how else is she gonna know about those bands? Put in a cute little lamp, and of course, a desk with a Windows 95 PC. Okay, that's a lot. But I think all these items can be included. The PC would be the trickiest item to fit in, since there wouldn't typically be more than one computer in a house during the 90s. However, this is the only form of gaming that was most well known to girls at that time, since console games made for girls were pretty much non-existent. Why not something like the Hello Kitty Dreamcast? Well, for one, the Dreamcast came out in 2000, just too late for our 90s room. Second, this device in particular was exclusive to Japan, just like the Hello Kitty Game Boy. A bit out of place for our American room. That just leaves the PC as our most viable method of gameplay for our girls' room. And it would need to be program locked to one game, and that game has to be either in the Purple Moon series, if the imaginary owner of this room is older than 10, or one of the Barbie CD-ROM games. It can work just like the wall of PCs in the back of the museum too. So a PC in a new sanctuary room would fit right in. Decorative items for this room will be received via donations, and getting these items will likely not be as difficult as it was to obtain items for the 80s rooms. Everyone I know has something from the 90s. Like this radio I have. It's older than me, it works great, but you'd have to take it from my cold dead hands. Enough about the props. Let's get into what this actually means for the National Video Game Museum. I think a complete girls' room in the sanctuary section would be a fitting addition, since the exhibit intends to connect with the viewer by having real-life items from the past that they can touch. And while it does appeal more to older patrons, most people are coming in with their children, sharing what it was like growing up with video games in the past. A 90s girl room would produce the same effect. It would be a focus on a gaming demographic that often gets overlooked and underrepresented. Like the other exhibits, obviously not everyone will find it interesting. Maybe the 90s isn't far back enough in time to be considered history. That still won't mean a 90s room can't be added later. Why not carry the same effect from Gen X parents sharing pieces of their past to their children over to millennial parents? This is why an addition like this matters in both a video game history's perspective and a personal perspective. Girls' stuff is very sparse in the National Video Games Museum, much like it was in video games as an entire industry for a long time. Any mention of the girls' games movement of the 90s is absent too, and that's why there needs to be a third sanctuary room made to look like it belonged to a girl in the 90s, complete with a PC with girl games from that movement. It won't just exist just to have girly things as a large focus either. It can also allow patrons to connect with the room the same way the other two rooms in the sanctuary do. It would just appeal to a different demographic. Not everyone will like it, but that's okay. But I want you to imagine for a second, someone who was a preteen girl in the 90s, finally seeing your past represented in a way that you could literally reach out and touch. Finally, in an industry that ignored you for so long, you are seen.